Hey guys, Luxqaer here. 2022 was a weird year for me. Once after lockdown started easing up and things were starting to go back to normal, I really didn't have a plan for myself. Mainly because I was burned out from videos I made in the first half of the year. To Xenoblade 3 hype becoming a player, to starting a new job, getting a new car for myself, and just being extremely tired in the latter half of the year all the time. I didn't end up making as many videos as I wanted to, mainly because of the lack of motivation, and wanting to do a lot of other things for myself at the time. But I feel like now that I've gotten used to things now, I wanted to go back and start making videos at a steady pace for this year. But I already made a post about that in the iCard in the top right corner. But long story short, 2022 was a mixed year overall for me. However, the games of 2022 I think were pretty great. We've got very great games like Elden Ring, Mario and Rabbids Sparks of Hope, Neon White, and a freaking game where you can play as a silly cat. There's so much to love about it, and I wanted to talk about those games and to give a mini review of them. But because of the stuff I mentioned previously, I only managed to play a handful of those games. Mostly Nintendo because that's kind of been my mainstay for much of the year. Those games are Pokemon Legends Arceus, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Radical Dreamers, the Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series, Xenoblade 3, Splatoon 3, and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I'll also talk about the games that didn't release this year that I played in 2022 at the end of the video. But I will only give a paragraph of this script dedicated to those games. Also, if you like this video and want to see more videos from me this year, please consider subscribing and ring that bell icon. Also, don't forget to like and comment on this video as well. Without further ado, let's start going down the list. In the past couple of years, I had sort of a vendetta about the developers of the mainline Pokemon games, Game Freak. That after a period of poor decisions in regards to what their audience wants versus a game that meets the quality that I would expect from a Pokemon game, Pokemon Legends Arceus is very different in that regard, as it abandons all the common things we love about the gameplay of Pokemon games. Turn-based battles are gone, no running into random encounters in the grass, no weird gimmicky stuff, and Pokemon abilities and held items not being a thing. But personally, I love the way Pokemon Legends Arceus pulls you in it so well. The story makes you feel like you're in a mystery dungeon story, where you get transported to a new world against your will with a goal of filling out the Pokedex. But then when you meet more characters and learn about this massive world around you, it starts to click for me, and it makes it such a personal experience. Okay, I know this sort of storytelling is nothing new in video games, but it works so well for the open world you experience. Never in a Pokemon game, or any open world game for that matter, have I actively wanted to search out every Pokemon for my decks to complete the mission. But not only do you have to catch those Pokemon, you have to catch many of them, or you have to have them use a specific move to fill out for challenges for the Pokedex completion. It is so simple and satisfying to fill out those challenges you fill out for the Pokedex, all to work towards your mission. And that's not all to the gameplay. Pokemon can actually harm the player, and you can actually black out and go back to where you came from. You also have to watch out for heavy fall damage, drowning, not paying attention to what you're doing, and so on and so forth. But my favorite part of this game are the actual boss fights against all the lords of each area. The mechanics are incredibly simple, but they are so fun to master, from dodging the lords' attacks and trying to calm them down from their rampage. It almost feels like Dark Souls, but the patterns of the bosses are incredibly simple, but challenging. The trainer fights, although, are incredibly weak, because this is a very different Pokemon game from the norm. Turns are decided from the speed and level of the Pokemon, and which style they are using, strong or agile style, which tries to make the battles feel strategic, but they end up being very confusing and just not very worthwhile. Especially with a certain trainer fight in the post-game. The controls are also incredibly awful, mainly because of this swap menu right here. It should be so much simpler than it should be. In normal Pokemon games, the X button is used to open up the menu and find your settings that way. But in Legends Arceus, the X button is to change the swap menu from writing items in Pokemon. So then I press the plus button to open the menu, and oh wait, that's the ride Pokemon button! Such a great place to put it, by the way. Why can't it be the Y? Oh wait, that's the dash button! So I check the next best button, which is the minus button. Whoops, that brings up the map! See what the problem here is? Even though they made such a great game, they ruined the experience by the buttons being for commands I barely use. Or on buttons that just plainly don't make sense. I do know that you can change the button mapping in the system settings, but why not just have the button mapping configuration in the game in the first place? And that's a common trend with a Pokemon game that we'll talk about later. Other things I like to mention are that the music in this game is very good, despite it not being played all that often. I like a couple of the characters, especially Irida, who I want to pinch her cheeks, and some of the characters who are parallel versions to the characters in the Diamond and Pearl games. Also, did I mention this is basically a Gen 4 reimagining? That's just pure dedication. Oh yeah, there's also a photo gallery that is very underrated, and you should have checked it out more. Overall, a solid game that even though I have problems that might prevent me from going back into it, I think the quality of the content in Pokemon Legends Arceus shows that Game Freak has put effort into their Pokemon games, and will continue to do so for a pretty good amount of time. Let's just hope a Pokemon game coming later in 2022 will match those expectations. It's Kirby's 30th anniversary. You know what that means? It's Kirby's favorite No, just kidding. It's Kirby's first 3D platformer. And it's pretty good. Alright, I know people have sung its praises into my ears saying it's the best thing since freaking Gilgamesh, but I find it to be a pretty solid entry and a great step forward for Kirby. HAL Laboratories really knows how to make a Kirby game work so well for their first outing, especially if it's in a 3D setting. Them putting a relaxing hub world is such a great way to feel what is going on around you, even though there's not much to interact with. The levels themselves, such as a fun water rushing level, the carnival levels where you are on the edge of your seat trying to maneuver around them, and some of the nice challenge levels used for testing out copy abilities especially. The boss fights feel excellent, and the bosses themselves use the background or the amount of space on the battlefield just to make them a great time, and the post-game boss fights are just excellent in general as well. However, there are things that hold Forgotten Land back for me a bit, which are the copy abilities not having a wide enough moveset as in the previous games. Sure, you can upgrade them and they get more powerful, but I wish there was much more to it. I also wish there was a better balance between the strength of the copy abilities. Like, why is fire just so incredibly broken in this game, and why the box standard hammer is just not good? I also get that they cut out a lot of abilities from this game, but I sort of wish staples such as Stone or Ninja Kirby would be here. Though the Ranger ability is a pretty nice ability that fits in with the 3D platforming aspect, Drill Kirby, however, is not so great. I also feel like the music can be better, even though there are tracks that I overall like. The OST is pretty mid, and the mouthful mode introduced in this game, while being interesting on a level design aspect, it's a gimmick I feel is on the border of ridiculousness. The stuff like stairs and making regular appliances topple over on what I'm talking about. It just feels one and done, and it's especially apparent when you don't keep your mouthful mode ability to the other stages. I feel a copy ability or something would have been more fitting in terms of level design that is distinctly Kirby, but not a forgettable one at the same time. Heh, get it? Forgettable? Because we're in the Forgotten Land? HAL Laboratories made a very great 3D Kirby game, but it just needed a little bit more to call it one of my favorites. There really is a lot you can do with the concept, and the execution needed to be expanded on a bit more, but the fun level variety, boss fights, and continuing to be a fun Kirby game in general is just enough for me here. So, even though this game is technically a 1996 game, this port of a Satellaview exclusive is the first to be officially translated into English, which is awesome considering the plethora of 90s visual novel-like games that never left Japan. This one especially is important because it was made by a lot of the staff from Chrono Trigger, and was actually considered to be a sequel for a while before it was shelved due to the uniqueness of the Satellaview. It was only able to broadcast during certain periods up until a certain time, where it was shelved for good, never to be seen again. Except when people found a ROM of it, and yeah, we already know the story there. Making it considered a side story to Chrono Trigger instead, until its actual sequel, Chrono Cross, came out 3 years later, which many elements from Radical Dreamers was put into Chrono Cross. Anyways, enough of the backstory. I just want to say, this is probably one of the most drab and boring visual novels I've ever played. The pre-rendered visuals of this game are very well detailed, and it has a charm to it with the glowing beady eyes in the dark during some fights, to the ghost in the mirror having some great dialogue to him. But the dark tone this game goes for overshadows the charm. It's such a shame too, because I think this game is really well written. I just choose not to care because so much of it just feels like it wants to put me to sleep. It goes for a mystery element where kids need to find treasure, but finds so much whimsy along the way that it distracts from the characters. I can sort of see why people would get into this story for it having a darker tone on the Chrono series, but in retrospect, I couldn't remember any events of the story, minus the ending, which I won't spoil for the people who haven't played it. The game is also very short, only a 2 to 3 hour playthrough or less for each ending. This game does not have any content in it at all, coupled with a battle system that doesn't know what it is doing to the tumultuous point and click elements. This game shows its age. The music is also nothing to write home about. Even though Chrono Trigger composer Yasunori Mitsuda composed the soundtrack to this game, not a single song stood out to me. And it's such a shame too. He was learning Celtic music at the time in preparation for Xenogears, but the music failed to stand out to me as he would in Xenogears. And perhaps one of the worst parts of the game is the evidence of crunch that was shown all throughout the game. I understand that games like Majora's Mask and Xenoblade 2 actually turn out to be fantastic games under a strict deadline, but Radical Dreamers isn't one of those games. The game feels barely interactable, with the same layouts copy and pasted over and over. The main characters have little to no character at all, and we cannot get a good look at their faces especially. The endings of the game feel like they came out of nowhere too, and it's an excuse to make it part of the visual novel branding. Besides the presentation, this is perhaps one of the most aged 2022 ports I've ever played, and Square Enix did so little to make it memorable in the slightest. Just play Chrono Cross instead, unless you are a die-hard Chrono fan like I am. Bandai Namco seriously had the gall to revive their beloved platforming mascot from the late 90s, and turn it into a very worthwhile collection. And I bought it for that purpose. I want to support Bandai Namco IPs in hopes of bringing a certain other Bandai Namco franchise back from the dead and remastering. Oh yeah, back to the Cabot. I'll be quite honest, these remasters of games that came out in the late 90s and early 2000s are very good. Not like the visuals were greatly overhauled, but it looks absolutely charming for what it was going for. This is perhaps Bandai Namco's best remaster so far, knowing that their later remasters aren't the most well received right now because of their visuals or gameplay quirks. But translating Klonoa into modern times is such a great idea, because both games have become one of my favorite 2D platformers now. Let's start with Klonoa Door to Phantom Isle. The game's visuals are actually based on the Wii port released in 2008, but upscaled to HD to give it that very nice look. The colors look gorgeous especially, and I love the effort they did with the lighting in these HD versions. Sure, the PS1 version had a lot of charm as well with their visuals and sprite work, but the models are just splendid to look at, and capture the charm just about as well. Some differences from the Wii version include the revoicing of characters into Phantomillion, rather than the god-awful English voices of the Wii version. The colors overall look a lot brighter too, and the textures were redone somewhat. But overall, it is the same game, but had a ton of realized changes to fit with modern standards. Although the CGI version of the ending in the PS1 version still isn't there, I still think the ending really hit the mark regardless. Now let's talk about the actual game. It's fine. Okay. Actually, I really like the gameplay here. Picking up enemies a la Mario 2, and using them as a second jump is such a novel concept that I'm surprised isn't used in other games of the genre. And the game makes you throw stuff in various places like the background to get collectibles, and enemies that normally can't be picked up and thrown. It's such a unique platforming mechanic. I also love the 2D 3D style too. It's like Kirby 64 but much more active and realized with the throwing mechanic. It is further enhanced with the boss fights, which take advantage of this style very well, and do it so wonderfully. Even to this day, I love the style and it's just so underutilized. The music is also spectacular, though I wouldn't mind a studio version of the OST to be played instead of the compressed PS1 music. I love the puzzles as well, although some stuff in the later stages can be very frustrating, such as hitting all the switches at a certain time, or throwing an enemy at a specific point in the background. You just can't even reach it. The last few remaining levels were so bewildering that it kind of made the otherwise memorable location feel so stressful. Getting 100% in this game is also stressful because you have to grab all 150 Dreamstones and Phantomillions with no way of tracking what Dreamstones you missed in each level. You can probably tell that I spent so much of this game just going back into the levels and trying to find the Dreamstones I missed. And the worst part, the Dreamstones only change one thing about the level. The Dreamstone icon turns white instead of green, and that's it. No special reward for doing this. The final boss doesn't have much of note either, and I didn't really care for the side character even though so much of the fanbase hates Hupo for some reason. Overall, Klonoa Door to Fanmile is a very good platformer, but it just needed to be less frustrating to the player and less clunkiness involved. Klonoa 2, on the other hand... I'm just going to say it, I did not expect Klonoa 2 to hit as hard as it did. Not only did it fix my complaints I had with Klonoa 1, but it kept everything I liked about it with a great story, great level design and music, and did way more with it. More likable characters, more great action and puzzle-based levels, and an actual point for picking up the 150 Dreamstones in each level. This game has perhaps the best ideas for levels I've seen on a platformer. Skiing levels with Klonoa singing down them, a level full of mirrors that have an opposite thing going on with them, and a level where you get chased by a giant war machine after fighting it. What more can you even ask for? I love the theme of dichotomy, especially in Klonoa 2. The denizens of Lunatea just flat out leave their own world of war and normalcy to have fun in a carnival. Our companion Lola having to deal with her own traumas, and freaking Leorina, man. She is perhaps one of my favorite villains out there with how much of a snark she is for trying to beat you all for the purpose of, oh wait, that's probably spoilers. But you get the point, I was hooked on the story. But do you know what else is so great about this game? It's probably one of the most successful platformers to play for all ages. The reason? Its life system. If you happen to be at 2 or less lives at a given point, the game ham-fests you extra lives just to keep you going. And I think it is awesome. A lot of platformers out you out of lives in favor of losing money, or some other kind of consumable good if you will die often. But here, lives are plentiful, and make it accessible to any player regardless of their skill level. I can talk about how awesome Klonoa's design is in this game, how gorgeous the game looks now on modern hardware, and not stuck on the PS2 anymore, or the plentiful Xeno or Gnosticism references this game has. But this would make it a full review already. But I'm asking you all to play Klonoa 2 if you haven't. It's such a darn good game to pass up, and it's so well worth it to include its duology. In general, the Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series, though it doesn't have much besides the duology of games, a digital art book that is sold separately, and a sound test, it is very worth the time to buy this. If you support wanting another game in the franchise and want Bandai Namco to keep going on with games in the series, I would sincerely want you to pick this game up. It's pretty much on all available platforms and goes on sale pretty frequently now. Please man, I just want Klonoa to keep on living. Oh yeah, the game about fighting in order to live and live to fight? That's up next! It didn't take a lot going into it. With the many videos of me covering the game during its hype cycle, to the amount of research it took before getting into the game, from finally playing Xenogears, which inspired so many things of this game. What can I say at this point? Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was my game of the year by just looking at it. However, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites in the series. I actually made a non-spoiler review of Xenoblade 3 last year, and I'll put it in the description of this video, but I actually have more non-spoiler thoughts on Xenoblade 3 after I made the review. I just want to say, even though the combat is very solid for the most part, it has a lot of drawbacks, mostly because of balance and strategy regarding the classes. One such class just flat out breaks the game because of how beneficial they are, where other classes like it fail to compare or even be like that class. I wish the classes would be more balanced with each other and not rely on just instantly winning a hard fight. I also wish there was some sort of custom difficulty to offset enemies with such low HP for chain attack damage. There's a lot of builds I want to try out, whether they're high damage builds or builds that rely on enemies having a specific amount of defense that I want to try out. Xenoblade 3 classes have so much potential for them that it makes it really hard to make a build you want, but have enemies just either wall you or die instantly at the end of chain attacks. But overall, Xenoblade 3 is seriously a fantastic game. I want to wait until all the DLC is out before I make a decision about how much I enjoy this game, and I will make a spoiler review of it. But I think the messages of this game brings out have brought so much happiness to people, and this is what makes Xenoblade so great, even in general. After skipping out on Splatoon 2 back in 2017, I never even got the chance to get into the game, years after it was released. It wasn't until Chuggaaconroy's Splatoon 2 Let's Play and Nintendo making Octo Expansion free for Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pack members, I decided to give it a try. And man, I haven't played Splatoon since 2015, and it really shows how absolutely sucktacular I am at it. But I knew there was a game on the horizon that I was going to get anyway that will hopefully bring me back into the swing of things, and that was Splatoon 3. So, how did it go? Well, for one, the story mode is fantastic and a big step up from story modes before it. Having a nice interactable hub world is the next best step for the series, and it shows very well why that is. There are collectibles in so many places, and it tries to make you go out for them to upgrade your gear, unlock different types of bombs, etc. There's also special locker items to customize your locker with, and a whole ton of eggs to get you through whatever these globs are. The levels themselves are great and rely on a lot of action and platforming knowledge to get through them. I'm glad Nintendo took this direction with Splatoon 3 single player because of how well it worked out in Octo Expansion. However, I still feel like I enjoy the quick levels that Octo Expansion made you do, instead of trying to break a bunch of crates to fit the right shape. I also felt like the ending to Octo Expansion felt like there was going to be more build up to the ending section, which Splatoon 3's ending section felt like that, but it was a tad bit frustrating to get through the rest of the stages. Overall, I love the single player, but I wanted there to be more levels to have more puzzle focus, along with the balance of action focused stages. I think it would have made it a lot more of a solid experience for a single player mode. But the multiplayer aspect is really great too. It's just the solid Splatoon fun we all know and love, but with a lot more focus on competitive aspects that I just didn't really care much for. For instance, the new mode for Turf Wars that can be played during Splatfest called Tricolor Turf Wars are some of the worst design decisions you can make for a casual player. Like, if you are the defender in these, good luck trying to win because it feels next to impossible for everyone and their grandma trying to grab the signal in the middle and pretty much wipe the floor with you instantly. Defenders cannot even have the chance to recover. It's just like being completely overwhelmed by the two other teams, and they just flat out suck. I also tried some of the Anarchy battles as well, but since I'm still trying to find a good staying ground for the multiplayer, I didn't play it as much. I mainly stuck to Turf Wars, and I think it's still a good place to play on, especially for casual players. But what I think is the highlight of Splatoon 3's multiplayer is Salmon Run the Next Wave. I think this is a huge improvement and very fun with 3 other people. You can learn so much about each type of salmonid from what they do, and it can be quite chaotic. I still haven't beaten my first boss salmonid yet, but I hope to do so sometime this year with a group of people. Also, Big Run is probably the best mode in the game, for the simplicity of taking Salmon Run stages and sticking them in multiplayer maps. It gives the familiarity of the maps themselves, but adds Salmon into the mix, and you can do so much with them. I will definitely play as many modes of these as I can. Some other things that are in the game are table turf battles that I unfortunately didn't get the chance to try out. I've been pretty busy these past couple months and I couldn't find the time to try it out. Hopefully I can get to that in 2023 also. I also liked a lot of things that were brought from Splatoon 2 that I didn't get the chance to try out, like dualies and a lot of other things. I also think the locker customization and the emotes you get to do after every multiplayer battle is a nice addition. I'm still like level 16 in this game, so I haven't tried out a crazy amount of stuff. I also like the new trio of characters, even though Fry is kind of not my taste and Big Man! Overall, I love Splatoon 3, though I will say I do agree with the issues going on with the frequent online disconnects. Especially if it happens during a match and I have to redo the room again. They're just so frustrating to deal with. And it also felt like it's going to affect the overall health of the game with Nintendo's online service still giving many people issues. But we'll have to see in the long run. It's still a newer game and they all will change soon enough. When it was revealed in the Pokemon presentation for February, I was very confused. Pokemon Legends Arceus was just released the month prior, and we are still getting another Pokemon game? Like, really, Game Freak? Well, as time went on and more trailers for Scarlet and Violet showed up, I slowly was a bit more hyped for the game. The open world looked very well realized, and I liked the direction they took with the 3 routes you'd need to take, and how it was explained in such a simple manner. But when it came out, though... Yeah, Scarlet and Violet look incredibly rushed and unpolished right out of the gate. There were multiple performance issues and people were experiencing game crashes for absolutely no reason. And I played through the game and experienced many of the glitches myself, but I wouldn't say the game is bad or anything for it. I only had the game crash only a couple times, and that was mainly from an apparent memory leak issue that it suffers from. Remember to close your game, kids, when you're done with it. Besides the bugs, I thought Scarlet and Violet were really solid games. I loved most of the characters introduced, and I found the routes to be excellent. The stories from each route were pretty solid as well, especially for the endgame section, which is something Pokemon or Game Freak shouldn't make their own game out of for how solid it is. The music is also fantastic. Many musicians like Toby Fox, Teruo Taniguchi, and Hiromitsu Maeba joined in to work on this project, and they all did fantastic work on this game's OST, especially. It might be one of my favorite Pokemon OSTs in general. Also, it has an Ed Sheeran song in the credits. Cringe! However, these aren't like one of my favorite Pokemon games for one pretty large reason. I hate the progression of Scarlet and Violet. What is progression, you may ask? Well, in a typical open world RPG, the progression starts from slowly easing you into the world of the game by letting you ride a vehicle or animal to move faster, climb walls, flying around, or find a whole bunch of things around the world to find every little nook and cranny you can find. Along with having a decent challenge with anything you could come across, anywhere in this world. I know people hate this comparison, but Breath of the Wild had as good of a progression system as you can get. From the start of the game, you can climb walls, there are so many things that can be found throughout the game to interact with, and a bit later on, you can glide and ride a horse to move faster, which made exploring the world just so much more interesting. Scarlet and Violet take place in the open world of Paldea, where you can pretty much explore everywhere after you complete the beginning section of the game. However, the legendary Pokemon that you befriend in that said beginning of the game becomes your trusted steed, and basically what you would use throughout the whole game to make those movement aspects. And let me tell you, I did not like this steed. It starts out as a crawl that you might expect, and when getting multiple upgrades from doing a crest route, it can move faster, surf on water, jump higher, glide, and then climb up walls. But here is the problem. Climbing up walls or flying is a necessity for exploration. There are so many times where I wish I can climb a wall so I wouldn't have to worry about it for later. Especially if it's finding important things like the seals that let you fight the legendary quartet, or finding an item at a seemingly suspicious location that you want to reach but you just can't even climb walls yet. The level balancing in this game is also very awful. Unlike previous Pokemon games, the gym leaders can be fought in any order because of the open world Pokemon is bringing now. Except that you can't, because gym leaders have a set level where they would be at, and you are stuck having to do gym leaders in a set order. This isn't just for gym leaders either. Wild Pokemon, the Titan Pokemon, trainers, and the Team Star grunts and bosses are all at varying levels depending on where you are on the map. Basically, the game is forcing you to play their own way and not explore everywhere safely, which I don't really like. It's such a big problem that I can overlook the performance issues and the good story and characters to just flat out not caring for the game overall. Like, I really want to like Scarlet and Violet, I really do, but it's abundantly clear that the open world just feels very flawed to implement at this point on Game Freak's end. Especially the feeling that I was rushed to make a holiday deadline. There are a bunch of small things I appreciate, but the huge progression problems Scarlet and Violet have are preventing it to be that way. Okay, now it's time to talk about the other games I played in 2022 that didn't release this year. I'm only going to give a short version of how I feel about these games, just so that this video won't be over an hour. But I have to say, the games I played were pretty great. I didn't play many outright bad or mediocre games, especially for one which we'll get into, and I enjoyed my time with a lot of them. Let me go down the list of games ranging from my favorites I played this year, and end off with the most disappointing game this year I played. I finally got to play and finish the Steins Gate visual novel after so many of my friends kept talking about how much of a heart they had for Kurisu. And let me tell you, this visual novel is an absolute experience. I've never experienced a story, setting, writing, and characters that are embedded together and expressed so well throughout the whole story. Okabe Rintaro is now one of my favorite protagonists in any sort of media because of how he started as someone who wanted to experiment with time travel, but ends up with a traumatizing experience near the end of the game. The setting of Akihabara is so great for this story because it shows the stereotypes of some of the characters very well, and how they manage their lives around their culture. I especially love all the science facts that the story talks about, and weaves it in with the plot and the characters. I can go on and on here in this paragraph, but I'll put a Twitter thread in the description to see my full thoughts in the game without spoiling too much. And I do want to talk about the Steins Gate franchise in general in a video sometime this year, because of how deep this series goes, as well as trying to get others into it as well. I am also currently going through Steins Gate Elite, and am planning on picking up Steins Gate Zero sometime in 2023. But my god, play this visual novel, man! One of my favorites now! After wanting so much to have a port of Xenogears, I eventually decided to emulate the game and just go on through it. Especially after the Xenoblade 3 initial trailer had many similarities to Xenogears from the get-go. This game has been an absolute joy to go through. From the world, the characters, the music, and pretty much so much going on around it. Fei Fong Wong is perhaps my favorite JRPG protagonist, simply because he dealt with so much trauma from his past, and now confronts the fact that he has to push on even if he loses a part of himself in the process. And that was pretty much what makes this game so special. Its very loose in-game story tells itself by this beautiful protagonist sitting on trying to find an answer to the troubles with the world, and how the little world is falling right on top of him. It's very well known about the development of Xenogears feeling so rushed, and I totally agree to that. But Xenogears is able to tell a story and shows the outcome of mental health and psychological consequences around it. If you're a fan of Xenoblade, I implore you to emulate Xenogears. You will not be disappointed. I mentioned in my Splatoon 3 section that I finally got Splatoon 2 because of the Octo expansion being free for NSO plus expansion pack members. But mainly I wanted to get to play the Octo expansion because I heard it's one of the best DLCs you can get on the Switch. And it shows, it really shows. This expansion is such a great addition to fill into the lore of Splatoon, where humanity was once a prevalent thing in this world. The subway system especially takes the cake, and I love the new characters introduced here as well. Pearl and Marina are just so gosh darn awesome in Octo Expansion because of not just filling in as Agent 1 and 2's role, but there is evidence that they've been in this creepy area themselves, all trying to make it out of hell and into the promised land. I especially adore the heck out of these levels. They are pretty challenging, but still rewarding and just fun to play through. The 8-ball levels, destroying balloons within a time limit, having to navigate a maze that will give you vertigo at times, and made me love Splatoon puzzle levels just so much more than the action-focused levels. If you haven't played it yet, now's a great time to get into it since it's part of the NSO expansion pass. I couldn't believe my eyes when I noticed we are getting Mario Kart 8 DLC this year. Forgoing the leaks of Mario Kart 9 happening in 2022. I know a lot of people didn't like this direction, and I can agree to that, but adding upon a game that so many people have is perhaps a better logical step instead of just continuing on to the next game, which will probably be saved for Nintendo's next console. For the most part, I really enjoy the DLC tracks that were brought in from Tour or the previous Mario Kart games. I don't want to get into each individual one because I'm planning to do it on a video I want to do for next year. There are a lot of ups and downs for each track, but Nintendo ended up being pretty consistent with how they brought these tracks into 8's engine. After all these years, I finally got to play Banjo-Kazooie on NSO Plus Expansion Pack. I have to say, it's a little bit hard to get into just knowing the game for so long, and finally get the chance to play it. But what can I say that already hasn't been said for Banjo-Kazooie? It's a classic game that easily sets the bar for both collectathons and just 3D platformers in general. It has great characters, just classic music from the legend Grand Kirkhope, and the visuals surprisingly look very nice for the N64. It's very interesting how I didn't grow up with this game even though I had an N64 growing up. I played Rare's other games like GoldenEye and Diddy Kong Racing, but I'm surprised 2022 of all years was my first time playing with Banjo. But since I didn't grow up with the game, I saw the large amounts of clunks like the funny N64 camera controls, not being able to save your notes for each level, and just not having the quality of life things that the Xbox versions had. And also the final boss being kind of a pain in the ass. In the end though, I still liked it a lot, but I just wish I had the same experience with people who grew up with Banjo. I managed to fit in a couple games when I went on vacation in October. One of those games is Grease, a very stylistic 2D platformer that sells you a lot in the art style and the general mood of the game. It is also pretty darn short, but it fits in quite well on a plane ride. This is actually one of the best games to play on a plane because of how you fly around in each area, trying to get a nice new ability, and even the ending section just being so fantastic. And that's really all I can say about it. It's a nice, relaxing game that doesn't overstay its welcome, and tells its story very well. Sin and Punishment is an N64 classic that I heard a lot of praise for, but I didn't really know if it's the right game for me or not. So when it was on the good old N64 Plus expansion pack, I was like, why not? I love the plot to this game. Like a whole world basically going against you and have to fight tooth and nail just to take it back is something I admire a lot. And the game takes a lot of great twists, like you basically turn into the enemy of your friend, and you must bring yourself back into it all. I don't know, it goes to a lot of places. I enjoy the on-rails gameplay too, even though I flat out suck at these a lot of the time. Perhaps it is because of the terrible control scheme I was playing with that kept me from enjoying it to its most potential. I also didn't like the English voice acting either. It was either too quiet for me to hear or just flat out annoying when played during gameplay sections. Overall, a fun on-rail shooter that the N64 doesn't have all that much. Limbo is the other game I played on my vacation. It is more difficult than Greece, but it is still short enough to enjoy all the puzzles it brought and how to find a great way to get out of the darkness, which Limbo does very well with its environment. And I have to get this out of the way, but I wasn't scared of the spider in this game. I have a lot of guts and I generally don't like insects crawling around close to me, but it's a game at the end of the day, and the spider isn't going to come out of the game and kill you either. There's one problem I have with the game though, and that is mainly how the game progresses in the end, where there's nothing really scary going on, just a bunch of hard to make jumps and puzzles that really want your butt handed to you. But it was a nice, hunting, and short game that I wanted cleared from my backlog. When I realized that the 3DS shop was going away next year, I needed to buy a whole slew of games from there just so I can experience it on the platform that it was meant to be played on. One of those games was Pushmo, a puzzle game that revolves around pushing and pulling different types of blocks from a pre-made picture to reach the goal at the top of the picture. It's such a nice simple concept for a Nintendo puzzle platformer, and it plays the puzzle elements so well. Like, I really had to think about so many things, but I want to say though, do not 100% this game for your mental health. The special stages are absolutely garbage on how to solve them, and it involves a whole ton of mental gymnastics to actually figure it out, and just makes you feel frustrated about your performance in the end. And your mind really can't take so much pushing and pulling at once. If you end up buying it, just finish the main story and just be done with it. Oh man, what a horrible time I had near that end. I mentioned in my previous year's review video that I was playing through Pokemon Shining Pearl, and I did, and I had to put it down, then pick it up again later. Yeah, I had a bit of falling out of this game. I initially considered it as part of my top 10 of the year, but then it would stoop close to the bottom. This is probably one of the most uninnovative Pokemon games in general. It's basically Pokemon Pearl, but in HD, taking out the nice features that Platinum gave it, and put Gen 8 mechanics on it and called it a game. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just so hard calling it a remake when it does things so backwards. There's little customization options, and it's not even the most challenging until you reach the Elite Four, and has pretty much the same post-game stuff that we already knew from over 10 years ago. The limited time in-game Pokemon events are still here, the same overhead camera, and you get the idea. It just doesn't have the same polish as expected from a Gen 4 remake that we all wanted, and that's kind of a shame. Which makes me hope that the Gen 5 remakes really aren't botched, because they're beloved games in the series, and it would really suck for the franchise as a whole to get into that direction. And finally, the most disappointing game I played and finished this year is Doom 64. I talked about how I didn't like Doom 2 last year because of the poor level design and frustrating enemies, but Doom 64 actually manages to be about as bad as Doom 2 in terms of level design, and that's it. But what makes it worse is that there was just way too much going on all the time, with enemies riling up on your ass pretty often, and that you get stuck so much that you have to start from a previous save in order to get out of it. Stuff like that is what frustrates me about Doom 64 in general. I don't feel compelled to find all the secrets if the game treats me like shit while playing it. Heck, the final boss is just pure garbage wrapped around a frustrating plate. Just don't even bother at this point. Play the newer Doom games. And that's 2022. Like I said, I generally play a lot of great and amazing games this year. Each game I played was very distinct from one another, and I enjoyed my time with them. But with 2023, I want to focus on just going through a series of games first and foremost, and then move on to the next one, as well as trying to fit in some smaller games as well. Those games include Steins Gate Elite and the Steins Gate Zero VN, all 3 Xenosaga games and their spin-offs, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, the Nier game starring with Nier Automata, the rest of the Mario Kart 8 DLC, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet DLC, and Xenoblade 3 DLC. Some of the more smaller titles include Amori, Kid Icarus Uprising, Hollow Knight, which isn't a short game to 1%, but you get the point, and Katamari Damacy Reroll. As well as any Switch or PC games that I feel inclined onto getting into. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and leave a like and comment on the video about what your favorite games of 2022 are. I would be happy to talk to you about them. Until then guys, see you on the other side!